My name's Stacy Seabrook, and I approve Erekose on Making a Murderer to be able to use my songs on his channel. Thank you.
Don't get strange, no, 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 oh, I ain't getting strange, don't get strange, I ain't getting strange, I'm sick of the suffering, can't stand the pain, don't get strange. Well, we know the story, oh, ain't the way they say, we can see, plain as day, they got to Brendan's head, totally insane. Strange. Everything they got, questionable evidence gathered by Manny Wall, but it makes such sense of why they're in the game. Don't get strange. Don't get strange, no, no, no. Oh, now I ain't getting strange. Don't get strange. I ain't getting strange. And that lying, that cheating, that predatory sweat GA, anything he said, he couldn't throw away. He's a legal stain. Don't get strange. Oh, may we finally find out who's to blame. Don't get strange.
Hello everybody, how you doing today? Got a little bit of a, I don't know, little special treat here. Tonight I was actually having a live on my other YouTube channel, which I'll leave a link below for those of you who are interested in subscribing to that, and so you know what happens over there. I do occasionally upload there. Generally I just do fun stuff over there, but last night we started out, it was just supposed to be a live for fun, but it turns out a friend of mine showed up who's very knowledgeable about the science end of this case, and it ended up being a very, very worthwhile discussion. So I went ahead and I captured it, and I am going to upload it now to Erekose on Making a Murderer, because the subject matter was really, really good. So I just wanted to share it with everybody. This is my friend Scooby, obviously with Travis and a little bit with Marissa S. But basically, Scooby is the science. Scooby knows the science really well, understands the DNA pretty well, understands the bones pretty well, has a really good understanding of those things in the science generally involved with them. Obviously, Travis Williamson, he's really good on the legal end of things, so he understands the whole legal process of things and stuff. So it was a very interesting discussion to listen to Scooby and Travis, to basically listen to science meet the legal. Very interesting. So this is that video here. Hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll see you again at the end here.
Travis, are you back or?
Yeah, I'm here. So
okay, so I was gonna say, with the okay, we have all of the bones, right?
Yep.
But we have a bunch that were allegedly unidentifiable as human or animal. Would those have been passed off to the Hallbach family, or are those supposed to be kept?
My reading of the statute is, unless you know for sure, you got to keep it. But this other person seems to be confused about that. But the Bard Journal article wasn't confused. The only question that the Bard Journal had was they didn't list specific remedies in the statute. What happens if you violate it?
Yeah.
I mean, the bar journal, Travis says that you can't give them to the family if they don't know they're humans.
Well, they never say that. They say
Oh,
evidence,
biological evidence.
biological
Oh.
evidence that can reasonably inculpate or exculpate a defendant should be kept.
yeah.
And
Well,
and then, you know, she was saying, well, reasonably, you know, the way I read it, it's only evidence of Teresa's biological matter. And the statute doesn't say that. It says that in subsection 2, the victim's material, but subsection 3 says any biological material. Then I asked her the question in the chat. I was like, well, nobody cares about the preserving the victim's DNA. I mean, you put it in there to make it a comprehensive statute, but the victim's DNA never exonerates anybody. It's the DNA of the real perpetrator.
yeah, usually in the legal cases. But the problem here with this, it looks to me from that video that what they gave her was, what they gave the Hallbucks was material that Kratz said during the trial was not human DNA. And well, first of all, I have real issue. I didn't have little respect for Dr. Leisenberg, as I call her. She's a state shill, and forensic anthropology is as much of an art as a science, you know, and her track record is not that good. Do you know about her other case that year? The one with the fetal bones?
No, but it doesn't matter. The state's experts are always shills, and that's why you need a good expert on the other side and a good way of presenting it.
It matters because it was bad, and unfortunately the defense, I think, unfortunately the club of forensic anthropologists is very small, and I don't think Fairgrave did a very good job because he did not, you know, call her out at all. I mean, her exam was crappy. First of all, you know, I'm a, you know, have a background in molecular, or one of my backgrounds in molecular biology. So I know the DNA. I wasn't a bone expert, but I sort of did a lot of research, and anything that you read says that, first of all, bones that are burned that badly, you can't tell just by looking at them whether or not they're human or not. You have to do microscopic evaluation and or histology. And Eisenberg didn't do any of that on anything. So while she claimed that the pelvis during the trial, she said the pelvic fragment, which was probably one of the biggest available, which that doctor from Marquette University, which is a reputable university, thought was human. And Bennett, I believe him, and they got rid of him real quickly. You never heard from him again. So, and a pelvis is very, well, it was a pelvic fragment, but that's very distinct. So that probably is human. But,
and it was a large fragment, wasn't it?
Well, it was larger than the other ones. I think it was one of the more larger.
So
it would have probably been more likely to actually have contained DNA in it because it was less damaged.
Right. And so
yeah, I think the statute says
during the trial, well, I don't really, I'm talking, you know, I'm focused, I guess my purpose, I guess, here and with what I've been doing with this case is just to get at the truth. So I don't really care about statutes. I just care about like what's
you know, if you want to get to the truth, you got to satisfy these statutes, unfortunately. Otherwise, they can rule. They can, well, not maybe, if they rule, let me talk to
you about the reality.
Well, no, you got to have an understanding of this first. So they could rule you didn't have to keep the bones. Too bad, so sad. And then that's the legal reality. And so
maybe the legal system needs to change, but let me just try to.
But what did you think about Zellner's experts? Zellner's affidavits of her forensic anthropologist. he mentioned, a lot of the things you were just critical of. I'd be real curious what you thought about the experts that Zellner got, what you thought about what they had to say. I mean, they were very critical of Eisenberg.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she didn't do but what I just wanted to finish saying was that Leisenberg's statement during the trial was that she could not say that the pelvic bone was human or not because it was in such bad shape. Well, I would say that it was in at least no worse, if not better shape than the other stuff that she said was human. So first of all, that's a problem. Now, in my opinion, Fairgrieve should have, called her out on all of this stuff. I think the defense just got ripped off. And, it's like there's only like 1,000 forensic anthropologists in the whole world, and they're all in the same club. And none of them are going to, really, go out against each other. So, but the bottom line is she didn't do.
Zellner's has no qualms or hesitation about going after her.
Covering your mic again.
He ripped her a new one.
Yeah.
Said it was below standards.
Yeah. Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
I mean,
so
he didn't have any hesitation.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. So the big problem here is you honestly can't say that whether or not, especially since no DNA was obtained, whether or not any of this material is Teresa Halbach, let alone human or not. I mean, and if you look at the wording, it's all supposed.
Yeah, which is why the statute.
They can
possible. Say possible is the word.
Or possible, supposed, whatever. You know what I mean? It's like they can't say, without to a reasonable scientific certainty, whatever. You can't by just looking at those fragments. It's not as clear as people think. So it really hasn't been. And then Travis, isn't this kind of like again? I'm no legal scholar, obviously, but isn't this? So it frustrates me. I know, and I'm sorry, it frustrates me that the legal systems, there's all these technicalities, whereas in science, we just care about getting to the truth. So who cares? But I understand. So that's very frustrating. However, if the jury was not informed about these other burn piles, then isn't that like withholding evidence? Isn't that a Brady issue? Then, or is it that not because it wasn't withheld from the attorneys? Did the defense know about those other burn piles?
It was all listed by GPS coordinate.
And therefore handed over in discovery.
Okay, so therefore, technically then that's not a Brady violation.
But the way Zellner's argued it is that Eisenberg knew that there were 3 piles.
Yeah.
That's imputed to Kratz. And when Kratz told this theory about one burn pile, and that I'm not even going to spend 20 seconds on it because you can't
from that pile that gives something to the hall box.
Right. And you can't take anything from that. So I'm not even going to spend 20 seconds on it. And, but it was a weird thing that happened at trial on cross-examination of Leisenberg. The defense got her to say that those pelvic bones, that pile, which is all they really talked about, was probably human. And then the defense expert on cross-examination, Kratz or whoever, I don't know who was doing it, Fallon or Gone or Kratz, but
it was DNA, it was probably Gone.
they pinned him down. Well, it was bones. They pinned her down. They pinned the defense expert down a little bit better and asked a more precise question. You can't say whether those bones are human or not, can you? And he said, no, I can't. And so he's probably being honest. He's probably going, these things, and it's probably what Eisenberg should have testified to about a lot of the bones. But, you know, there's the problem is that these experts get paid so much money. And there's this ego thing. We saw this in the staircase with Peterson.
Yeah.
And what's the name of that expert that, you know, totally disgraced? And
Deaver.
I mean, Deaver came in with blood spatter and said, oh no, this couldn't happen from a fall. This was clearly a beating with a you know, a blunt or sharp instrument, and so on and so forth. And it turns out, you know, they have at least 34 cases where he manipulated and lied, and then look what happens to him. He gets fired, not prosecuted, nothing. It's unbelievable. But
Yeah.
you know, you got human ego involved that which I think they exposed with Culhane pretty well.
Yeah.
But you know, they the folks that work for the state, they're under tremendous pressure, and then the trial experts, they make so much money, and they know that this is close, but if I don't come up with something that's going to help the state, I'm not going to get hired anymore.
Well, right.
You know?
And that's the problem with the current legal system and the science, is that, you know, is that often these quote unquote experts that are used, they're career testifiers. They work for the prosecution or for the state. And well, in 2009, again, I come from the science world, and only since I started becoming interested in this case did I learn about the forensics world, which I attach science to loosely. And so there's always that bias that you bring up. And I'm sorry, Travis, I know you don't know me, but I get a little passionate sometimes. Plus, I just learned about these other two bone piles since you guys made your video. And I just think, I mean, it's kind of like what you said, this case, you know, I became interested in this because of the DNA, because of my background, and I just started looking into it. And when I started seeing all the problems and all of the bad stuff that went on, and contaminated samples being allowed and stuff that should never ever happen, I was appalled. And I thought, you know, and then I learned this goes on all the time. This is in our country. It's a real problem. And in 2009, the American Academy of Sciences, you know, made this big report. You may have heard of this, about the FBI and how much of their science is junk, like all of this bite mark analysis, all the pattern analysis, and all the, you know, it's voodoo basically. And they proposed that there needs to be glaring reform in the forensics world, and that the crime labs should be completely removed from law enforcement and the state, and should be independent entities. Because right now, basically, you know, the crime labs and all of these, you know, experts are working for the state. And so the poor defendants, usually who have a public defender, they don't even see their DNA results, you know. And it's just, anyway, that's what they proposed. Of course, nothing's happened with that since 2009. And Jeff Sessions took that out of the budget. Decided there wasn't even a need.
No, it didn't go as far as what they recommended, but I'll tell you, for example, in the West Memphis 3, it that report led to the reversal and exoneration of numerous cases because of bite mark. It put,
Yeah.
you know, it
Oh, yes.
completely revamped that, and
It didn't change. I mean, I guess it didn't change the way the system is still working overall, I guess is what I meant. But yes,
yeah.
it did bring up about how some of those types of evidence are basically worthless.
Have you had a chance to look at this testing by the guy from UCLA that
The quick DNA testing?
quick DNA testing? Have you had a chance to look at that and what he's done?
Inspect the science?
Is he using algorithms to fill in the blanks? And he's got a highly accurate algorithm?
I don't know. I haven't had a time to get familiar with his to look into exactly what is.
That's your first assignment. That's your first assignment, yes. Scooby.
Because I just as I said, well, I guess you kind of missed my little intro last night, but I was very involved in this and started looking into the DNA went right after MaM1 came out. So what is that, almost 3 years ago now?
Yeah, 3 years.
And did a lot of research, and I was really obsessed, and then I kind of left. So I'm just getting at literally the first I heard about this was yesterday or the day before when I watched your video, which had been done before. So I haven't had time to do a lot of research into it, but
okay.
You know, obviously it's the and you're right. And what is scary and not scary is that you know, this DNA testing, it's moving so much into it, and you bring that up, and that's a whole nother can of worms, that they're going more and more to like you said, using algorithms and predictive testing, and not even actually, you know, looking at what's there. And I don't even know if they're doing STR testing or if it's mitochondrial DNA testing. I don't have any idea. And the quick part, now he did develop that quick test, like I think you might have talked about this, because yeah, the forensics world is very interested in this quick DNA testing, because now they're going to have, which scares me a little bit, because now they're going to have the police officer be able to, you know, test your DNA.
Oh, I don't think that should be
right on the spot, which no, I don't think it's
that's fraught with problems. I see.
Yeah.
It needs to be a separate entity. It's bad enough being a separate entity, but at least it's better than, oh my God, no.
Yeah, I'm with you, Eric. So I've been, this whole quick DNA thing has made me very nervous. So
but this DNA testing, the quick, that I haven't looked at the act yet, but it's a little bit different than DNA testing where, you know, where they receive a swab. And
I'm not sure how,
it's different because it's limited to a buccal swab is going to be collected right at the station. It's only testing suspects, people who've been arrested, you know, right then and there. I still don't know, you know, if the protocols are going to be accurate or sufficient, and I don't know who has to collect it. But, you know, right now, depends state to state. What state are you in, Scooby?
Wisconsin.
So in Wisconsin, all I know is what they did in this case, and they took the suspects, Stephen, Brendan, Mr. Avery, Mrs. Avery. They took them down to a hospital, and a nurse collected did the buccal swabs. But I believe in most states, an evidence tech can collect it from a suspect.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they've, you know, and Houston Police Department's one of the places that has one of these machines or devices, or I don't know what it is, if it's just a computer program where they can run stuff and get a result back in 2 hours.
Right.
But I did want to say that it's different than getting a blind sample. You know, presumably they're going to have, you know, the correct buccal swabs. They're going to collect a proper sample, and they're going to, you know, walk it over straight to the whatever apparatus or instrument they have, which is, you know, completely different than somebody getting a swab in a lab. And the safeguards you have to implement in order to, you know, to avoid a contaminated sample. But
Yeah.
what did you think about when you?
I'm just not sure. I'm sorry.
When you first looked at how big a deal is this 7 Loki thing?
Oh my goodness, don't get me started. How long do you want to talk? Okay, first of all, that should have been not allowed. So do you know I don't know how far back you want to go, the history of that. Now the state knew, okay, you know, there should have been.
I'm familiar with all the details of it. I'm just wondering, you know, I know.
He wants to get your take on it.
Okay.
Seven Loki, and it only is 1 billion compared to, you know, 1 in 50 billion is what you'd have.
And I don't even know if that is accurate or means anything. But so here's the thing that you have to look at when you're talking, and people will debate this and understand what's happened in the legal system is that, of course, the technology has advanced much further before the law was able to catch up with it. And when you say partial profile, that has classically meant you have maybe one loci missing, you know, or one, not more than half of your genetic material, okay? That test should have been called inconclusive or incomplete. That was not a partial profile. And the state knew that initially, and I know they knew that, and because it was not enough to assign, how can they say that? To attribute source to. They could not attribute, if you look at the DNA reports, the wording is a little bit different with that. They could not attribute, that to a source. So for instance, if you look at some of the blood, although she did go on, because for the court she had to supply statistics, she could just say this blood sample was consistent with being, you know, consistent with the profile of Stephen Avery or whatever. Well, that's called, you know, attributing a source. She couldn't do that with the incomplete test that she had. Now, that was the reason that they went on. There was a hearing on December 5th, which was why, and Sherry had done her test just before that. Well, at that time, and in that report from December 5th, did I say the 12th? I meant December 5th, 2005. There was a preliminary hearing. Now, they were very smart in that they used the word partial profile, but they did not provide the actual data. And the defense did not think to ask. They just assumed. So the defense did not know how crappy that profile was. However, they knew that that would not be good enough for an ID, which was why they sent it on to the FBI for the mitochondrial DNA testing. Because if seven loci, you know, were good enough, and, you know, 1 in a billion chance, they would have just been okay with that. But they knew. So if you look at the DNA reports, the data is not published. It just says partial profile. And then there's some other wording that's a little, there's a lot of, you know, for an important case, there's a lot of errors in the lab reports, or maybe errors, or I don't know if they're errors.
How
For
many are you
instance,
up to, Travis?
86
Major?
fundamental errors,
Yeah.
major errors.
yeah. So because, and you don't know if they're errors or if they're like they didn't proofread. For instance, it says the partial profile of the tissue is consistent with the partial profile of the pap smear. So now people were there, and there was a lot of discussion about this on Reddit. So does that mean they didn't even get a full profile of the pap smear that was used as their standard? Because your standard should be a full profile. And then if you research into the use of pap smears, they don't always produce full profiles. So was there ever is that an error? Is that a typo? Did they have a full profile of the standard? Did they not? We don't know.
Well, that's
So
like
anyway.
you say, we don't know if that's an error or not, because
Exactly.
we do know later on from the backup material that the pap smear gave them 15 out of 15.
Later on, right? Yes.
Later on, you know, we knew that, but she
Yeah.
should have never. Now I understand how significant that is. She never should have used the term with respect to Teresa and the pap smear DNA. She should have never used the term partial profile.
Yeah, but you don't know. But when she said that at the time, so you don't know if that was an error or if maybe she didn't get a full profile right then, because the pap smear was taken out again in March. Out of evidence, it was, and I don't know if she was retesting it anyway. So let me just explain. I guess you asked about the 7 loci. So there's also a quality thing. So these tests are meant, as you know, there's the little primers that are like the little targets that go in at the loci and attack their mark. And if your sample is good, they should hit at each of the loci and you should get results at each of them. Well, sometimes there could be a problem with 1 or 2, but it's also a quality of an issue. So a lot of most scientists will say, and again, what's happened in the forensic or crime lab world is that they've stretched and stretched and stretched the limits of what's acceptable. So, a pure scientist would say that if your sample is so bad that you're only getting, it's degraded to the point where you're only getting results at such few loci, you can't even trust that those results are accurate, because I don't know how familiar you are with the STR testing and what all is involved, but there is some subjectivity to reading those reports. You get a graph that's printed out, and it's hard to, if someday maybe I could do a little tutorial and show this, it would be much easier to explain. But one issue is that, and this is why most people would call that report, a scientist would call that report inconclusive, because it's not only the fact that you didn't get results, it's the fact that the sample is obviously so bad that you can't necessarily trust the results that you did get. And you would have to look at what we call the raw data, the graphs, and see what the printouts look like and see how strong those results are. So that's
at the preliminary hearing you just mentioned in December of 2005, the defense attorney Lloyd, he touched on it a little bit, and he was talking about, so you had a hit here, and then you had a double hit here, and they were talking about the 2 extra loci that their computer package had, but that weren't at the time required by the FBI. Those were the extra two. They
Yeah.
talked about it, but we can get you all of the raw data from this
Really?
particular case. Oh yeah, it's all
Oh,
available.
it is?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
They discussed it in the trial. It didn't make it out of the editing room into making a murderer, but it's all in the transcript.
Oh, I didn't know that it was available, because I know people got the records, but maybe it wasn't.
Saw it. Yeah, I saw it at some point. I saw the little peaks you're talking about that
Oh, really?
are similar to spectrograph or
Yeah,
spectrometry, and you
the
see
electroencephalogram it's called. Yeah.
and so and so you could get false peaks, you could get noise in there, and a bunch of stuff.
Right. And
so,
when they show, like when you do like a buccal swab where where it's a fresh biological sample, nice new cells, and the material's all perfect, you're going to get one of those nice graphs like they show in pictures. But the reality is that in most crime scene evidence, it's degraded, it's old. And so your graphs, your readouts are not as clear. And sometimes there's like double peaks or peaks. There's a threshold that the peaks are supposed to meet. And sometimes they might be like sort of on the border, or, it's not always clear cut. And they've done a couple of interesting studies now that show, there always is experimenter bias. And this is the other thing that, of course, the American Academy of Sciences recommends for crime labs, is that they need blind testing. Because right now, you've got somebody working on the tests who has an agenda. And whether it's overt or not, someone like Sherry Culhane, for instance, her job is to please the prosecution, and to work for the prosecution. And everybody wants to do a good job, and so if you have a peak that's on the borderline, you're going to, be inclined to say, oh, that's positive. And they've actually studied this, and they've given a sample that was, kind of nebulous, that could be considered, yes, this matches the suspect. No, this doesn't match the suspect, or it's inconclusive. And they've changed the story. Like in one case, the profile belongs to a guy who's really sleazy and scummy and, a bad person. Well, the DNA analysts, they always find in favor of that being a match or positive or what they want. And then they've taken the same exact data and presented this.
So it's confirmation bias.
Exactly. Coming from a person who, she's a nun, and she was on her way to church and she just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, they find those peaks, not good enough. So she's ruled out. So they've shown, clearly now that you can manipulate, it's not even necessarily conscious, so even without any kind of, nefarious activity going on, people will tend to, things can be interpreted in a way, that, so there is that to go along with. So if your job is to find Stephen Avery guilty, which I clearly think it was in this case.
Well, we have that phone call from Gasbender to
then
Culhane saying, hey, we what was it, Eric?
Find him in the garage.
We need to find him in the garage.
Yeah, put her in the garage.
Put him in the garage.
Or the trailer or the garage, actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that's your job, even if she isn't consciously thinking that, you're going to be inclined to do what you're told. So there's that issue too. But what happened with that? So that on itself would not have stood as a very strong ID. What really was a strong ID was the mitochondrial DNA, which of course didn't make it into the trial. But I don't. And actually, I'm very impressed, Travis, and I love people like you because it helps me a lot because you really know all the legal shenanigans. Eric, you look bored to death. Anyway.
I look bored to death. No, I was doing something. I'm good.
Anyway.
No, everybody's fascinated by what you guys are talking about. I'm also monitoring the chat. So.
Oh, but what? And I don't know how much of this was.
Sorry, by the way, Scooby, everybody's loving it. I mean, everybody's
okay.
loving what you're talking about. So, I mean.
I don't know how much of this was intentional or if it just kind of worked out. It did work out, and Kratz definitely used it to his advantage. But when the FBI results did come out, which was now in January, so we're talking, December was when the preliminary hearing was, and obviously the state knew that those results, at least we're going to need some backup, which is why they sent that to the FBI for the mitochondrial DNA testing, which, by the way, they use mitochondrial DNA because it's present often in cases like this where there's, especially in burn
tissue, right?
The mitochondrial DNA, there's a lot more of it because there's thousands of copies of it per cell.
Right.
And in bone, and again, I can go on, and I don't know why the tissue was used, but I'll just leave that out for now. Anyway, so in burn cases, they almost, at least back then, nowadays they've gotten much better with their STR, which is what Sherry used, analysis. But back then, they almost always used mitochondrial DNA for burn cases because it's just, for many reasons, it's much more, it holds up better, and there's just tons more of it. So you're much more likely to get a sample. So anyway, when those results came out, Sheriff Pagel, I guess, I don't know who received the report, but Sheriff Pagel, the report was dated January 17th, and they've taken it off of the internet, and I wish I would have downloaded a copy because there was a big press conference, and Sheriff Pagel on January 19th held, it was the big news in Green Bay, and it said, remains confirmed. That was the headline, as TH, which of course, even, scientists are never going to say that. The mitochondrial DNA report said that, Teresa Halbach could not be excluded, which it's the wording that's used. First of all, and someday when you guys are ready for it, we can explain a little bit about the difference between the mitochondrial DNA, but the language of the mitochondrial DNA testing is completely different than the STR. There's none of the 1 in a billion. There's not loci. They actually sequence parts of the genome. So the language of that testing is either a person is excluded or not excluded. So to be not excluded kind of means it's a positive test. Now, this case is very interesting because of all the legal ramifications. Normally, it's usually like a missing persons case where your son was a soldier in Vietnam at a certain time, and if it matches the family member, people just assume it's usually a pretty good test. So that test on paper, they would never say that it confirmed, but it's certainly at least. But again, the issue is I don't know what was tested or where it came from, but on paper, that was a good test.
Right.
And it did show that the results were consistent or consistent that Teresa Halbach could be, but certainly not confirmed. However, what they did, Sheriff Pagel used language, and so the press used language where they kind of intertwined Sherry Culhane's language from her report with the language from the mitochondrial DNA report of the FBI. So they said the FBI confirmed that the remains belonged to Teresa and that there was a 1 in a billion chance. Well, that wasn't from the FBI, that was from Sherry's results. And then they talked about the state crime lab. And then they had Mike Halbach come on in a very emotional state. Now, you know, and this is all preying on emotion. And Mike Halbach come on and very emotionally thank the state for identifying his sister, even though they knew all along it was her. And
Well,
blah,
you know what Sean Atwood says, right? Court case is basically two sides putting on theater, putting on a show. And
right.
whoever has the most money puts on the best show and wins.
Yeah. Well, so you see what happened here, though. It's very interesting. I mean, it's fascinating. And again, I don't know if it was but what they did was they mixed up, and the average person does not know the difference between the FBI and the state crime lab and mitochondrial.
Oh Christ! They can't even tell the difference between the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department and the Manitowoc Police Department.
Right.
Oh, I know.
So this was when, so now she was ID'd. So at this point, it didn't matter what Sherry Culhane put up on that PowerPoint, as far as I was concerned. At this point, at that press conference was when the ID was made. And that's what, it's just another example of how much of this case was tried in the media. Because they mixed up, and they mixed, it was all jumbled and it was unclear now. And that was, if you know about that email that Ken Kratz wrote to Sherry, where he said, I can send you a copy of that if you're not familiar with it. But later on, after that, Ken Kratz wrote an email to Sherry, and he said something about, I don't remember the exact wording, so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here, but something about like, well, it's too bad that the public got the perception that the you know, the ID or that the FBI results came from us, he said, but something like, it's not our fault.
He allowed the FBI said something, and Ken Kratz basically went along with it and ran with.
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah. He was like, but it's not our fault. So perceptions will be what they are. I can't do anything about it. And so, like I said, they used the fact that the FBI, which was mtDNA test, which really was what confirmed the identity.
Right.
They let people believe that that was Sherry's test, that those results were that was strong. So that when at the trial, so then the mtDNA wasn't allowed at the trial, but people were so convinced anyway that that was her that, like I said, it didn't really matter at that point, I don't think.
Right.
And then when Sherry threw her statistics, and the other thing, and people will debate this, but there are people who say that, okay, the statistics, which are all done, as I'm sure you know, Travis, by software packages. So that, you know, those testing kits and the equipment, they all come with their own software packages, and it spits out, you know, the 1 in a trillion, 1 in a whatever. The statistics are done for their software where, well, the statistics are based on tests that are completed. So there's two schools of thought. One school says that, so you can't just go and extrapolate the statistics onto a test that isn't an experiment, if you will, that wasn't completed.
Right.
But that the statistics then are no longer valid. But then there are, of course, the crime lab or forensics people say, no, that's true. They're just independent results, and you can do them. But I honestly don't know how she got a 1 in a billion. No one's ever seen the math. I mean, she used 1 in a billion for a couple things. So I honestly don't know really, but it really doesn't matter. She could have said 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, 1 in a whatever, and they would have been convinced that those belong to
1 in a gajillion.
So
I don't know. You reminded me of Austin Powers when you were saying that. There's that one scene where the president makes fun of Mr. Dr. Evil, and he's like, "Oh, are you gonna ask for a gajillion?" Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. But anyways, yes, Culhane. I agree with you about Culhane being unreliable. I mean, her own record at the lab, I think, illustrates that, because she's like, she makes at the lab or at least at that time, she had the highest rate for like mistakes or that type of stuff, if I remember correctly.
But, and Travis, I mean, I don't, of course, they're very careful with their wording. So maybe she didn't technically lie, but they knew they were misleading people. How can I say it in that? Although on the other hand, she came out and said, because whoever was doing the cross-examination did ask her, did bring up the point about how she could not, her data was not strong enough that she couldn't, I don't know if they use the word source attribution, but that she could not, say that this, was, however, then there was this 1 in a billion thing, which sounds very impressive. So that was good enough for the jury. But, and then it gets, I guess what I'm saying is, was that sample likely belonging to Teresa Halbach? Well, I would say yes, but based on the mitochondrial DNA results, if indeed those were valid. But then I also see, I just have a lot of questions, and maybe someone that are unanswered. Then the other big question I have is why, if they had a beautiful non-burned bone, or non-burned appearing bone, according to Dr. Leisenberg, which she testified to, that would be the prime source of material that a mitochondrial DNA lab would use. So why wouldn't they use that bone? Why would they use, because mitochondrial DNA is it's like bacterial DNA, so it's very prone to contamination. And they're actually sequencing, which is why they do it in specialty labs and why it takes so long, because they actually sequence the DNA. It's a much more sophisticated test. And so they actually bleach the outside of the bone or UV irradiate it to get rid of contamination. That's how careful that they have to be. So why they would use this grisly old tissue that's been laying out on the ground, exposed to bacteria and vermin and Lord knows what, when they had a beautiful bone. It doesn't make that. Leisenberg said she sent to the FBI, but they have no record of receiving a bone. All they have is Q1, which is a piece of charred remains or tissue. Yeah. And I've never known a mitochondrial. Now, maybe that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just don't know of a mitochondrial DNA lab to ever use tissue instead of bone. They always use bone. And anyway, so those are just questions I have, I mean, about what was done and why it was done and where's the bone and why wasn't the bone used? And I don't know.
I think we're going to have a lot to talk about when you look into this quick DNA testing stuff, and you can kind of give us the straight dope on it. And then how you think it pertains to these bone piles and some of your, original research.
But, what I found when I started looking into this is a lot more questions than answers. Like I said,
hopefully Zellner's going to help alleviate that problem.
Yeah. So like I said, because a lot of people ask me, about the test, and I said, yeah, on paper, the mitochondrial DNA, it's a good ID. However, then you look at, well, what was actually tested and where did it come from? So just because that was a good idea on paper, I don't know.
From what I understand, it's the charred flesh on the shin bone.
Well, right. I know that's what they said.
That's what they say, right? Yeah.
That's what they say. But then there's the other issue. How did this charred one piece survive?
Right.
When everything else was burned to smithereens.
That's why Stacy Seabrook says, leave one piece out for identification.
Well, that's kind of this is just, and I kind of stay away from theorizing about, I have no idea I'm because I've been really focused on the DNA, so I don't know, you know, many people know more about other aspects than I do, but I guess the theory that makes the most sense to me is one that I think Zellner has proposed or is sort of implied, is that the body was dismembered first.
Right.
And then burned, and that maybe one piece was left intentionally out for an ID. So anyway, but if this DNA testing is allowed and works, I think it would be fabulous. One of three things will happen. Either it won't work because, you know, these bones now are all very old too, which will be a factor, but you know, and I do need to, Travis, you know, learn more about this actual test because I haven't even had time to do that.
Let me ask you another question that other people have discovered, and only you are going to be able to explain this. So,
well, maybe not. I don't know.
well,
No
I
pressure.
Could tell you're going to be.
No pressure.
I could tell you're going to be able to explain it. So, on page 420 of CASO, and Adrian brought this out in her notes. So this is February 18th.
Okay.
They go out and interview Teresa's mom, Karen. And it's Liger, and along with
like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Along with Dumberling. And upon arrival, we were invited into the residence. I asked Karen if she had any other deceased children. Karen stated, other than Teresa, she does not have any other deceased children. Karen also told us that her mother, Dorothy, is still alive. However, she is in poor health. Karen also stated she does not have any nieces that are deceased, and she only has one aunt who would be deceased, who is buried in Schofield, Wisconsin. Karen turned over pictures of Teresa and her family and friends for this investigation. So this came up. People were saying, why on earth would these investigators go out to this bereaved mother to ask her if she has any other deceased children, and then start asking about other female relatives? And my supposition at the time was, we need to talk to somebody who knows about DNA to figure out there's got to be something that has to do with that, you know, they're trying to get something. So, you know, this is obviously after. Any idea why they would be trying to track down deceased
Yeah.
relatives?
Because well, first of all, the female thing is because they don't understand completely the mitochondrial DNA inheritance pattern. But the reason they're asking about the relatives, especially some females, is because they're trying to I would say sort of be proactive into making sure that there's no issues the defense could bring up as far as the bones perhaps belonging to somebody else, because mitochondrial DNA is, as they say, it's not specific to a person. It will trace you to a family or to a lineage, but it is not it will not identify you personally. So it will show that you are related to somebody maternally, and it's maternally inherited. Your mitochondrial DNA is inherited. So your mother, so this is where they got a little mixed up. Well, they did say children with the females. So mitochondrial DNA, as opposed to your nuclear DNA, which you get from your mother and your father, and then it's recombined and stuff. Your mitochondrial genome is passed on from mother to children. So all of Karen Hallbach's children, male and female children, will have the same mitochondrial DNA profile as Teresa and as Karen. Karen's
And I don't
mother.
mean to interrupt, but so why aren't they asking who's alive, who's dead? Those who are alive, including her mother, Teresa's maternal grandmother, why aren't they asking, oh, she's alive? Well, do you know if she would be willing to provide a sample? Why are they asking if they're dead?
I suppose because theoretically someone could have dug up their bones and used them.
But do they need to do that if grandma's alive?
Well, I think that's why they were asking if she was alive, right?
They're asking if she's
Well,
dead.
no,
though,
they started with, according to their report, and they're not great at report writing, but according to the report, the first question they asked was, do you have any other deceased children? No, only Teresa.
Mhm.
Okay. And then she said, my mom's still alive. And then they asked, you know, do you have any nieces that are deceased?
Right. They're hunting around. They're hunting for information to see if there are any potential people that could be sources of these, of bones, I guess, that could
Is the
provide this
FBI
profile.
capable of detecting, like a geneticist would? Do they have sophisticated enough testing that they can identify a disease, a congenital disease, the marker for that, and that they're you know, that they saw some
Are they that
horrible.
sophisticated?
Oh, that's no, but that's actually, oh, as far as mitochondrial disease, no. And in fact, that's a good question. And just a kind of a, well, sort of FYI, that's how I got interested in this area, because I have two nephews and a niece who do have a mitochondrial genetic disease. And after they're now in their 20s, and they still have not found a specific marker. So actually, in fact, that was how they started actually examining, well, just like with a lot of things, the mitochondrial genome, because of diseases. But there are very few known markers, even for, frank diseases. So that would be, no, you wouldn't be able to, but they would have the same, any maternal relative would have the same mitochondrial DNA profile. Now here's
If
another
they're descended from the same mother, if they're all descended from,
well, a maternal relative. So
through
let me show
maternal
you.
lineage,
And
right?
this might be something that I can show you on a piece of paper, because it's sometimes seeing things visually is easier. So, okay, so we're going to go back. So there's like grandma. You have a grandma, okay?
Mhm.
All of your grandmother's siblings, because they came from the same mother,
From her, right?
have the same mitochondrial DNA. So all of now some of them are male and some of them are female.
Right.
This was where Leaguer got a little, I didn't understand completely, because he was only asking about female relatives. Well, some of the appropriate male relatives would have the same profile. I think they were just kind of digging. I can only think that he was digging around to see if there might be any other dead bodies that the defense could say, oh, so that maybe that's not Teresa. That's
Let me ask it another way. Do you think that Gasbender and Dumberling were asking these questions more about a possible motive or possible suspects, or do you think it's more likely that they were asking these questions in relation to some type of testing that had been done or could be done?
I don't think there would have been any testing done, because this is not something that anybody would ordinarily do. I think they were trying to, I think, of course, I can't know what they were thinking, but I have to think that they were trying to make sure that there couldn't be any other explanation for this profile being found in a bone, that the only person the bone could be would be Teresa, because it could theoretically belong to any other maternal relative, which would mean, you know, any of Karen's siblings' children, so nieces, nephews, and then when you go way, way back in the family, and then this brings up another issue. In that area, see, the FBI database for mitochondrial DNA is very small. There's only like 1,000 or 1,500, 1,700 or something samples in it. And that's nationally. Now, the thing, when you look at, now think about maternal inheritance. So, you know, if you go out to California, like LA, where people, you know, there's a lot of migration, you know, people from all over the world, as opposed to a place like Manitowoc, where most of the people that live there have lived there their entire lives. They tend to marry there, have their children there. And so
they're all related. I mean,
right. Yeah, well, yeah.
they're
Well,
all related to people in Calumet County or Calumet County. They're related to the people in Manitowoc. They don't go too far.
So
everybody's third cousins.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're gonna and this study has not been done. So you have to wonder how many people living in that area have the same or very similar mitochondrial DNA profiles, because maybe going way, way, way back, you know, there's some relationship. It's you know, this is just sort of an anecdotal, but I always show this as an example, and not to that even if you look at the STR profiles, if you look at them blindly, you know, and by the time you get the STR, those are the nuclear DNA profiles. If I looked at Brendan Dassey, the Dassey boys, and Alan Avery, who's their grandfather, and Teresa Halbach's profile, Teresa Halbach has more alleles in common with Alan Avery than either of his genetic grandsons. Now, you know, what does that say? You know, not a lot. But anyway, it's just kind of interesting. And this is a very small sample, because these are the only profiles I've seen from that area. But it makes you wonder. But the point is that even, you know, there's a lot of common alleles. So now then, when you go to that 7 loci partial profile, you know, it does kind of make you think, you know.
Right.
That not a lot of studies, you know, all of these profiles, you know, are pretty new, you know, just since the 90s they've been doing this. So it really hasn't been, you know, we really, even though the FBI claims, of course, that they know a lot, you know, they really don't know a lot about the inheritance patterns of a lot of this. Or is that, you know, it makes sense to me that it would be different in a very confined geographical area like this, like a place like Manitowoc. You're going to see, I would think, you know, much more common alleles than when you're comparing someone against a national database.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
So
there's just going to be less of a pool of alleles to really, because it's not as diverse as, say, LA or Chicago or New York or Atlanta. Right. Yeah.
Correct. Right. Because
lack of diversity means less options.
Right. And so the statistics, so for instance, so these statistics like that Sherry used, those are based on, you know, the database. And I actually only found this out very recently when I was researching into the database, because again, I'm not from the forensics world, but I don't know how many millions of profiles they now have in the STR database, but the statistics the last time the statistics were done, they were only based on 200 profiles. So, you know, obviously you have to think they're obviously not looking at a billion profiles and doing actual statistics. I mean, it's all, you know, theoretical statistics.
Right.
But they're not even looking at, as more and more information is coming in, they're not changing. The statistics aren't even based on all of the information they have. They're just picking out a portion of it. So that's not necessarily, doesn't seem very accurate to me.
Right.
But anyway, I'm not a statistician, but I mean, I know the basics, but I can, you know, there is a lot of controversy about the statistics too.
Yeah.
Again, you know, if you talk to, which is why you have to be, I'm always look at, when I read a journal article or an article about any of this, I'm always cognizant of the source, because, you know, if it comes from like a forensics journal or a statistics type journal, they'll always be very supportive of the statistics. And
Right.
but then there's
Sure.
other people who are more critical. So again, it's a lot of things to think about and question. And I guess if this was it's complicated because there's so many, this will be someday, I think, a great law school case, because there's so many. If this was like a simple missing persons case without all the legal issues and complications because of the wrongful conviction, then you'd probably say, well, this, you know, the mitochondrial DNA looked good, and then there was this, doesn't really matter about the STR profile. Yeah, that's Teresa.
Right.
You know, it's just, but there's all these other factors involved that make you think. And that's why mitochondrial DNA, while it doesn't identify a person specifically, you kind of look at it in the context of the situation. And usually within the context of the situation, everything is good enough that you're able to say this is a positive, you know, say I feel good about this being a positive ID. And in fact, you know, who's been really, who really are like the best and the forerunners in the mitochondrial DNA testing is the military. This is one time when I'll be very pro-military. Their lab, because they started doing this with missing soldiers. And they also do blind testing, because even again, you know, you want to help a family out, you want to think you found the person's remains, so you're likely going to want to think tests are positive. So they do all their testing blind, and of course they've done a lot of this, and so they've identified, you know, they find remains of soldiers in, you know, Vietnam, where there's just a, you know, and so they're able to, you know, link them back to the families. And now that the STR, or the nuclear DNA testing, which is able to identify an individual, now has gotten a little more sophisticated, so they're able to use it sometimes on these samples that in the past could only be done with mitochondrial DNA. I believe in all of the cases tested, the STR has confirmed the mitochondrial DNA results, that they were positive.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me tell you something real quick. When we get this stuff to you about, this is from Selden's affidavit, which was attached, and it's going to be Exhibit 3. But so this is what he said. The ANDI program, that's capital A, capital N, capital D, capital E. Erekose and I just pronouncing that ANDI.
Sounds good to me.
The results of the program was the development of an automated rapid human DNA identification capability that minimizes analytical complexity, which analytical complexity is what you were talking about earlier, which is interpretation, and user manipulations for field forward biometric and forensic applications. So that's a nice way of saying it was developed for the DoD to identify casualties of war. That's what field forward biometric and forensic applications mean.
Yeah.
So it means that, if somebody gets, I really don't want to put in those terms. There's a lot of atrocities with war, and sometimes there's not a lot to identify a person with.
Right.
They would be able to bring what they had to a field hospital or whatever that had one of these instruments. But, I wanted you to be aware that that's how this thing got started, was the DoD. And then it went to Homeland Security, started using it. But the other thing I wanted you to just be aware of when you review it, I know you need to look the whole thing over, is that they talk about his system uses 27 locus, including the 20 locus that the FBI uses for the CODIS system. And I just thought it was interesting that the CODIS system uses, 20 individual loci, I guess, that you can enter. But his system uses beyond that. I didn't realize the FBI had expanded CODIS that we could enter up to 20 different loci.
Yeah, they just did that recently.
Okay, okay. All right, that's what I thought. Yeah. But so when you look at that, those are just a couple of things maybe to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. And the newer,
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
no,
ahead.
You didn't. I don't know what it's. But the newer tests, they're coming out with, they're adding more loci to be tested, which also, makes you also think, well, if 12 were good or 15 were good, well then, why are we doing more? Obviously, because, otherwise you would just stop, because obviously you're going to increase the accuracy, but you kind of also have to think the reason you do more is because, maybe you I'm getting tired. Maybe you know what I'm saying. You'd only want to keep improving your test if you thought, well, maybe it wasn't perfect to begin with. So not that they're not bad, but
or you just know that to get accepted, there's a lot of skeptics out there.
So maybe somebody would match up to 12 or 13 loci, but now beyond that, so that would be considered a match. But then when you go further out, well, now maybe they wouldn't match for all 27. So then they're, rejected. So you know what I mean? Now you're getting,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So,
because
so obviously, I don't. I think the statistics are theoretical, but nobody really knows. I don't think nobody really knows in practice how, and especially when you're, how, obviously, I don't want to sound like I'm being negative about the DNA testing, because obviously it is. The tests are good. The tests themselves are very good, but the problems that I see are happening are how the results are being used and manipulated sometimes. How can I say, by the legal system to mean sometimes what they don't mean, or to sort of, I don't know, stretch the meaning of what they mean, or to now, go further and further out, like, well, how good is, okay, 7 in the state of Wisconsin now, 7 out of 16, is good enough, so Now you may say, okay, that I'm comfortable with identifying a body, you know, with that, but am I comfortable for, you know, accusing someone of murder if they're, you know, if they're a suspect and I'm matching them to crime scene evidence and they only match with that many loci, you know, am I going to be okay with putting someone away with a result like that? I don't know.
Well, here's a distinction you need to be aware of. So they're using it with regard to the bone. They're using that to prove a couple of things. First, they're using it to prove that Teresa's most likely dead, because if you're missing this piece of your body, you know, you're probably not gonna, that's probably a lethal wound if you're missing that area of your body. It's not like a pinky finger with nothing else with it. And so they're using that with, you know, the supposed location of the car and electronics that they supposedly trace back to her. So they're using it with other circumstantial evidence to show that Teresa's dead,
well,
which is a lot different than, let's say, for example, a mixture case where they've got, hey, we've got your DNA mixed with the blood of Teresa Halbach. And then in that situation, it's like, well, you better be able to really nail that down, that is, you know, a positive, solid match, because instead of trying to establish that someone's deceased, you're now trying, it's more akin to the DNA on the bullet, for example, which is trying to tie the defendant to the crime versus, you know, she's deceased, which is why it makes it so important that the 3 piles of the other bones be tested, and why that should have come into evidence, that, you know, should have been talked about, these 2 other piles, and so on and so forth, all the things you mentioned earlier. But, and the other point is that it's a two-way street on the statistical problems that there may be with DNA testing and whatever shortcomings there are on the use of it. Keep in mind that, and I'm sure you're aware, you know, well over 200 people have been released from prison, and including death row, with the same testing and whatever its shortcomings are. I understand what you're saying, that, you know.
Oh, absolutely. But absolutely. But I think when I see that, you know, the system, the country needs to be careful, because I think the next wave that we're going to see are people who are wrongfully convicted with DNA results. And that I think it's being, in my opinion, sometimes, not always, but sometimes misused, or more liberties are taken in an attempt to get convictions. Sometimes it's easy to bend the rules of science. For instance, in this case, allowing a contaminated sample, you know, well, that's no big deal, they say. But, you know, to anybody who knows science, it is a big deal. And, you know, how far do you go just to get a conviction that you I don't think it becomes a slippery slope when you do things like that. There have to be, those rules are rules are, and I'm not even a real rule, but someone who doesn't really like I like a lot of rules, but those rules and that rule, especially for contamination, was put into place because it's so important. And, I know a lot of people poo-poo that, and that attorney gone in that Making a Murderer movie really, that was really bad
Well,
what he did.
that's a function of the trial judge, supposed to be the gatekeeper on this
Right.
stuff. And in MaM 2, there's a part where Kathleen Zellner is talking about, hey, this forensics is what wins these cases. Forensics. The stuff doesn't lie. Forensics doesn't lie. And, it's either going to be the final nail in Stephen's coffin, or, it's going to lead us to the real killer. And, she keeps repeating that over and over. It's in her briefs and everything.
Yeah.
But at some point, she said, this is getting political. I'll never forget it when I heard it for the first time. And so when a lawyer says that, the judge is supposed to be a gatekeeper, but that's the problem. We've had this swing for years and years and years. People run on law and order. If I'm elected governor, I'm going to appoint tough judges who are going to hand down tough sentences. And, they've run on that. And then, the governors that's leaving your great state said, during his term, that I will never grant clemency or a pardon to anybody. I don't care.
Oh yeah, well, thank goodness he's gone.
Well, not yet. He's got another couple of weeks. Who knows what he can do between now and then? But
Whoopsie. Oh, we lost Travis.
Did Travis drop out? Uh-oh. Let's see. T1's asking, let me see. T1 had a question. Maybe you might have a thought about this. What other items does KZ plan on testing besides bones? Can this rapid DNA testing be utilized in other ways? But that's what we're talking about. You still haven't looked into this rapid DNA testing, right? You still have to kind of look at it and get the grips with
I
it,
looked
right?
into it, on a surface level, and yeah, it could be used for anything, blood, semen, the basic. It's approved right now. As far as the FBI, it's approved for use with buccal swabs.
Yeah.
To be put into the database,
Yeah,
but
for CODIS and everything, yeah.
For CODIS, but it can be used. Basically, the test could be used on any type of sample.
Okay.
And I think I think that's mentioned in the motion, that it's been used with blood, kidney, liver, a whole bunch of tissues.
Okay.
Anything, basically any cell.
Okay. Well, then everybody's eager to hear you look into it deeper and give us a kind of an explanation of it all and a better understanding. So.
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot. It is a lot, especially, and it's something I think that you kind of learn over time, because it's a lot for just one night. So nobody should feel
yeah. No.
overwhelmed or too much. But I just wanted to finish on one of Travis's
you're saying, so go ahead.
points, even though he's not here. I can't remember what. Oh, he was talking about. Oh, and again, this is me getting on my soapbox a little bit, so I guess which may be relevant. But I think, but actually, I do think this actually has become, since I sort of started this journey, myself, which really was just out of my own personal interest in wanting to understand the evidence in this case,
Right.
which led to me learning about, how the legal system works and how the DNA analysis is used. And I think that there is a need for a lot. And so I think it is important that people, I guess, understand or are aware, because I think it's important. We all say, well, we're never gonna need to worry about it and whatnot. But I don't know that we can ever say that, because some of us, I think that there's a scientist that I really respect who says everybody who lives in the United States now should have a basic understanding of this DNA business that's being used by the law. Because I don't know if people realize, but the Supreme Court, for instance, I think it was last year or the year before. Everybody who lives in the United States now should have a basic understanding of this DNA business.
Mute your YouTube tab, buddy.
There I am. Because now, just being arrested for anything, you can have a swab taken and your biological material taken. That doesn't mean they're always going to do it, but because the lawyers aren't going to explain it to you, the judges aren't going to explain it to you. And again, as the science, the American Association of Scientists have said, the problem in the legal system now is that you have people who do not, and this is not meaning to be
They only care about the science that can help them.
Well, it doesn't mean to be insulting, because it's not that they're not intelligent, it's just that they don't have the background. Decisions about this evidence is being made by people who don't understand it.
Right.
For instance, judges, like that judge, and that's a huge problem in the system. And so then, and the legal system works on precedents, so, I mean, even though I understand what Travis was saying about how the death, in that case, the 7 loci were used just to make sure a body was dead. However, there's a precedent set now in the state of Wisconsin that 7, that a partial profile is less than half. And so who's to say that some other lawyer isn't going to argue in a case when it is being used to try to match a suspect to a piece of evidence?
Right.
Well, in Avery versus the state of Wisconsin, 7 loci was considered an acceptable means to be a positive ID. Right. So therefore my person can be guilty. So that's, that's what I see happens in the legal system. And yet, like I said, the average attorney and judges and all this don't really understand. And so what the scientists would like to do is take more control over what's happening. And I think that's a good thing.
I'm going to send you my video about CIFS. Have you heard of that? I know you like to follow Jerry Buting. Do you know about CIFS?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you.
I was saying, I know you like to follow Jerry Buting. Have you heard of CIFS? It's a nonprofit organization him and Dean started. It's basically.
No,
stands for the Center for the Integrity of Forensic Sciences.
Yeah, well, Jerry Buting, has, and I did not know this because, of course, I only met him after, all this, MAM and everything. And of course, we live, we live in the same city. So, but yes, he has been involved in forensics reform, and especially in trying to whip that state lab into shape for a long time. I mean, well before the Avery case. So that's a personal passion of his. So, and no, I didn't know about that, and I haven't. Like I said, I sort of did walk away. But Eric, I blame you. You've got me reimpressed.
Oh well, I'm blame me all day for that. Then I'm glad to be blamed for that. Right on.
I'm teasing you.
I know. I'm glad to be blamed for that. But, I'll take that blame.
I really have. I really decided I was, have gotten busy, and I just decided, I'm just going to leave this. So, but no, that's That sounds interesting. I'll have to look into that.
This
Yeah,
is
if you
going to
can
be
explain it for us,
great.
that'd be great.
But I know that he's very passionate about the reform in the forensics world and DNA, and that's great. That
I'm passionate about that too.
being an attorney.
It seems, I'll tell you what it seems to me, Scooby, it's doing is I would love to see CIFS pop up in every single state like Innocence Projects, and where
Yeah.
they become like the center for where all the litigators in that state look to whether or not science is good, bad, on the fringe, and then that way when they go into court they can argue that, and they already know because there's a center repository where they can go and find out about these things. I think it will help inform the legal system as a whole better.
Right.
I'm behind it. I want to see it catch on. Will it? I don't know. I'm trying to get Jerry on the channel to talk about it.
Oh, that'd be great.
But I'm trying, doing what I can. Not getting an answer yet. So hopefully, if I continue to just pound CIFS, maybe we'll get him on here to talk about it.
Well, maybe I'll talk to him too.
Well, I know he
anyway.
likes you, so maybe that'll help.
Yeah, we'll work on him.
Okay,
But,
right on. But yes, I absolutely think it's stellar. I mean, the CIFS is a stellar idea, and I think it's right along the lines of what you're talking about.
Because it's so complicated, and it's going to get so complicated. And like I said, it's not, an insult to anybody. It's just like, I don't know very little about the law, just because it's not my background. It's not my, area. And, so I wouldn't be going about advising lawyers on how to do their, job. And it's just, there needs to be so that's great. A better way, but that's okay. We can move toward a better way.
Yeah, I think definitely. So T1 is asking, has Scooby read Jerry's filing back in 2008 against the credibility of the DOJ crime lab? Wondering whatever came of that. Do you recall that at all, about something about Jerry's filing in 2008 about the credibility of the DOJ crime lab?
Oh yeah, I don't know that I read the entire thing, but I know he's been very concerned about the credibility of that crime lab in the state of Wisconsin, and I am too, because I live in this state.
Right,
so
right.
I do have a personal interest in some of this stuff, because it is a little about scary, and I don't know what's become of it. They've had some change up of personnel and stuff, but actually I'm a little scared because, as Travis mentioned, our fine governor, who is tough on crime, has not. One of the big problems in these crime labs is that they just, and again, this brings a whole other issue, but people like Sherry Culhane, they're basically technicians. They sit at their desk and they do these tests, which are basically, and I don't want to demean them, but they're basically it's like cooking, you put some of this, some of this, some of this, and they put it in the machine, and they're doing, thousands, I don't know how many a week, but day in and day out, it's like rote work. So they're way behind. They've got so much work to do. And now Governor Walker what did he do? So it used to be they did process DNA samples on, well, first it was just convicted felons. Then it was anybody arrested for a felony. Well, now it's anybody arrested, not even convicted, but arrested for a misdemeanor, i.e. shoplifting. You're going to get put into the DNA database. So now I don't even know what the number was. So he's like 40,000 or something. They were expecting like 40,000 more samples that need to be processed this year. So now, you got this lab that's not doing too well. I don't know, has some problems.
Yeah.
And now you're dumping a huge, I won't use the word, S-load of work upon them. Well, the last I've heard is that they are farming out some of the samples to Texas. So they're sending out, which
That's
again,
scary. That's
exactly.
Scary.
Yeah, because now you've got mail and things going through the mail, and it just seems like it's like a machine. The more cogs there are in a machine, the more places there are that there can be malfunction.
Right.
So this doesn't necessarily seem like a good thing to me. So I'm and lack of transparency is a huge problem with, again, coming from the medical science world, what goes, I guess that's the other thing that really floored me about how you don't know what goes on in these places. There's no transparency, and that's a problem too.
Yeah.
That really shocked me. I mean,
Check this out. This is going to be great when you review these transcripts, and I'm going to help you with this. We'll figure out how to get in touch. But
because you have a lot of information.
Annotate this. But you mentioned blind tests earlier. This is Culhane during the trial on cross-examination by Jerry Buting. Okay, listen to this. All right, let's talk about the testing process just a little bit first. Then we'll get into it in more detail. The jury, I think, needs to understand that the tests you do in your lab, or anyone does in your lab, are not what we would call double-blind tests. Answer, could you define what you mean by that? Question, or even blind test. You never heard that term? I've heard the term before. I'm not exactly sure how you are using the term. If you could define that for me.
Sherry said that?
Yeah.
She didn't know what a blind test meant?
Yeah, she said, could you define it for me? And then Jerry switched it to, okay, well, let's talk about a proficiency test, okay? And, he tries to simplify it for her. But I saw earlier where her testimony was based on, the FBI data set and so you'll be able to go through all of this, but the pap smear, she said, was 1 in 50 quadrillion, that it was Teresa Hallbach, which I didn't even know it went that high, but she talks about all the markers that she saw. She had 16 out of 16 loci from the pap smear, and but eventually we'll be able to get all of it to you, and it'll be fascinating to see what you're able to tell us about all that.
Yep, we'll be having Scooby back on real soon. Now that she's brave enough to come on here,
Yeah, well, if I can get my camera, hopefully I'll get my camera to work.
We'd love to see Scooby in real life too. So
yeah, I know. I really did try, but then I
know you did.
I gave up because I was missing out on the conversation, so I was getting interested. But no, it's driving me crazy.
And everybody loves you, Scooby. Everybody loves you.
I will work on it.
No, don't worry. When you go back and watch this, you're going to see everybody in the comment section loves you. So look into the Quick DNA. They want to hear your take on it. They already know they want to hear your take on it. So I mean, they love you. So
well, it's great to have I love to talk about it because
I know you do.
I mean, like I said, I don't have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions, and I think you should question things. People should question things, and that's
yeah, absolutely. But people respect that you actually have knowledge about this, and so your opinions, even though you don't feel like you have facts, but they respect your opinions. So
Well, and I try to make it clear when I'm stating my opinion versus just
that makes you a friend of the channel. So
facts. But anyway, it's the more I thought
and a friend of the wrecking crew. Sorry, go ahead.
Of course, I'm a friend of the channel. I've always been a friend of the channel.
Yeah, but now you get the illustrious honor of me saying it on video.
Now I'm officially. See, well, now you got me on. Finally, you got me on a video. You've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah, I know, and everybody loves you. So now you got to come back and tell us about Quick DNA testing. So we got you now. We got you.
I love to talk about nerdy science. So anytime I can find anyone to listen to, I'll be happy. And thank you, Travis. It's really helpful to have your
Legal expertise.
legal expertise to go along with it, because I've just been pretty much very focused on the science part in this case, and so I've which I think is the beauty of having, you know, a community, and you really need one, because fortunately there's so many other people who have brought various documents and things to my attention, because oh my gosh, that's one thing about this case, that it's like there's so many different reports, and sometimes
Yeah.
I think I have something straight, and then someone will show me like a different, like a report made by somebody else that'll say something different. I mean, the documentation is like a nightmare.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Everything is not all in one place, and so for one person to, you know, especially for me, I get real bored reading a lot of these transcripts and stuff. So, which I've read the basic ones, but that's been really helpful, you know, to have. So anyway,
Well, the
a lot of
science is critically important to Kathleen Zellner, you know, the forensic science. And so
it's a forensics case.
And so your ability to, you know, some of the forensic sciences I'm, you know, very familiar with, but others not so much. And being able to, rather than just take Kathleen's word for it, it's just going to be nice having somebody, you know, like you to be able to come in and explain to us in lay terms, you know, why this statement in a particular expert affidavit of hers is important, and why
or
this,
valid,
or why is this significant, and her criticisms of Weisenberg, and you know, that you'd be able to just the thing, for example, on what's the term? I can't even remember that you were talking about, a partial match, and then how significant that is, and then that Culhane in her report makes another error, and I haven't seen that. I've got to go back and look at it, but she describes the pap smear as a partial match, and you know, this stuff is highly significant, and why it's significant. Yeah, that's going to be great.
Right.
Yeah, like,
well,
how bad is Culhane at her job? Geez.
Well, it's significant, and this is in a report for, I mean, a first-degree murder case. I mean, you think you would, you know, it's not Bio 101, you know, so you would think you would at least proofread and make sure that your reports are clearly clear.
Right.
But, and so it leaves people wondering, you know, was this a miswording, or did she only have part of the profile? You're sort of guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at some point we can also talk about, you know, the accrediting authorities, and, you know, that's another systemic problem. You know, all of these crime laboratories are pretty much all accredited by one accrediting agency, and you know, they're trying to make it scientific, and you know, they've come a long way in that, and they're changing things and whatnot, but you know, it's the Association of Crime Lab Directors, AskLab / whatever, but all of our labs are accredited by them in Texas, all of Wisconsin labs. And talk about being in the club. when you've you know, the National Academy of Sciences or the NIH should be accrediting these folks and doing proficiency testing. And I mean, when you said they were sending tests to Texas, I mean, we've had cases where there was a lab down in Houston where a supervisor was caught helping lab techs, friends of hers, passed proficiency tests on DNA.
Yeah, you guys have had a lot of problems down there. Didn't
Oh,
Houston
tons.
like shut down and then like have to
Yes.
reopen?
Yeah,
For
so
a whole-
you're aware of all of that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then so these people
Scooby's pretty sharp.
they get caught, and
Yeah, so
they
we're sending our
resign,
test to Texas.
and then the next thing you know, they pop up. Oh, they're working at the DPS lab in Austin. You know, they
Yes, well that's the
they
thing.
just-
They don't get
just keep circling
Yeah.
around. That if we put 2 or 3 of them in prison, like the guy from the guy in Talia who manipulated all of the drug tests and put, pretty much every African American person in jail, arrested every African American in this tiny town up in the Panhandle. Well, that guy had been chased out of Virginia, and he ends up in
Yeah.
Texas. And
They don't. Nothing happens to these people. They fight. Maybe they fire them, but no.
no, you gotta put a couple of them in prison and have
Yeah,
that,
or lose their license. I don't think they're licensed. Well, and that's another issue I have. So someone like Sherry Culhane, and again, it's not meant to be a personal insult, but these people working in these crime labs, they're basically technicians. You don't necessarily have to understand what you're doing to be able to do these tests day in and day out. It's very
Yeah.
rote.
They
So
want a
when
degree in biology
So
or
now-
chemistry, but
right,
they-
a degree
but
in
what they-
biology.
but what
That
they
Sherry-
pay,
Sherry
mean,
Culhane had,
yeah.
in many years ago before mitochondrial DNA was probably even discovered. Anyway, so the point is, but she is considered an expert. She was the expert witness.
T1
And
says she's
again,
terrible.
Not to be insulting, but your average master's degree student will know more about the tests that she's doing than that she doesn't necessarily know about the science behind the testing. And when you said that she didn't know what blind testing meant, I mean, that says it all.
Mhm.
So what the legal system considers an expert and what is an expert are two different things.
Hey, T1 says her hairspray contamination alone should have.
Oh man.
All right. Well, I think
Yeah.
maybe we can call it in quite a while. I think everybody might be getting a little tired, and we can
Yeah.
and we
Well,
can
you can
listen-
only take so much science in one dose.
right, and then we can
That's
let Stacy Seabrook take us out here for a couple.
Oh,
seconds.
I
Stacey.
love this music. It is it's great.
Well,
All right.
just before you do the outro, I want everyone to be, aware that we're with Scooby's and Shaggy's help, we're tracking down who this Cap'n Crunch guy is that sued you.
This
Yeah.
Elizabeth, what was it?
Swallows, Betty
Elizabeth,
Swallows,
yes.
and
Elizabeth Swallows, yes.
yeah. So we're gonna nail that down, and first we're gonna get the case dismissed in Wisconsin, and then we're gonna go after these conspirators in Scotland, track them down, and we're gonna sue all of them. So this
I like the sound of that. Then we're
Yeah.
gonna have a big party.
We will not abide this aggression. I guarantee you, especially from across the pond.
Yes,
But,
certainly.
if I don't talk to you guys, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
And,
Yes, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everybody out there in the chat and everything. I know there's only 13 of you, but
Well, it is pretty late, at least here where I live. It's 12:48. I don't think I'm going Christmas shopping anymore.
right on. So we'll let Stacy Seabrook take us out.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Travis. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
Merry Christmas.
All right, so that concludes the talk, where science meets legal here on Erekose on Making a Murderer. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys found some of the things that were said interesting, some of the things that were talked about that were interesting. Now, of course, we're going to go into Stacy Seabrook. We're going to listen to a couple songs from Stacy to take us out. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. Hope you guys found it informative. And I will continue to try to bring you guys informative stuff, informative conversations, informative opinions. And I will continue to endeavor to bring this kind of stuff to you guys. Hope you guys liked it. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. And we'll see you.
Oh, Mama and Papa Avery, I said this once for you, just letting you know the world can see what they have put you through. Not that we could ever fathom or try to imagine the depth of your pain. But the case was a sham, the trial was a scam. The DA is a legal stain. I said, Mama and Papa Avery, we stand with you. No matter what the state says, oh, their lies we see through, because the blood, it was a planet, the car was a planet, Sam William Henry 582. The bones, they were planted, the bullet, yeah, planted, the key in the bedroom too. I said, Mama and Papa Avery, we send our love to you, just letting you know we can see what they did and continue to do. Mama and Papa Avery said this once for you, just letting you know the world can see what they have put you through.
All right, we're going to go another one, folks, just so you know. 2 more, actually.
There's something going on. Freedom is in danger. Agents of the state, they taking children from the manger. Oh, they will sacrifice your kid. Take Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did. They needed someone on Jody wouldn't flip. They looked around, saw him quick. Oh, it made so much sense why. Oh, Brendan Dassey, he was Stephen's alibi. There's something going on in Wisconsin that's not kosher. We better stop, let's all take a look closer. Oh, they will sacrifice your kid for Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did. They visit him once, they visit him twice. They make him feel so safe. Sandwiches, soda, so nice. No cameras rolling and under no lights. Who knows what went on up in Fox Hill Monday night? There's something going on. Freedom is in danger. Everything about this can't get in stranger and stranger. All we know, they will sacrifice your kid. Oh, Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did.
Thank you, T.
March 1st, alone in a room with Bert and Ernie. No parent present and no attorney. 4
Moments later, with a touch of the knee, they finally get Brendan to agree.
There's something going on.
I say there's something going on.
Oh,
We'll sacrifice your kid.
take
Rick Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did.
There's something going on. I said freedom is in danger when
The agents of the state, they're taking children from the manger. Oh, we will sacrifice your kid. Rick Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did.
Take Brendan Dassey. Oh, that's exactly what they did. Let me tell you about a story.
About a man go bound, about the law enforcement, the right bunch of clowns, how they wear their badge like a plastic crown, how they're sticking to a story of which they are now bound. It'll make you, they'll want you to go down. But over in Wisconsin,
They're doubling down. See, they framed them once. Then they did it again. They did not count on filmmakers making MAM. They thought their lives were safe. All went by the ruse.
they did not figure on 19 million views.
It'll make you shake your head and probably frown. But over in Wisconsin, they're doubling down. I said they're double down.
And the triple down. They're headed down a road they cannot turn around.
They
Walk around like they'll be home free. They control all the evidence, all the local judges and found as a state's AG, but I got some news.
It's as plain as day. It doesn't matter what the state or the council say.
Cause we got Kathleen. She's got him in her sights. She's a real life hero, turning wrongs to rights. No matter how hard that state's gavel pounds. Over in Wisconsin,
they're coming down. I said no matter how hard that state's gavel pound. Their house of cards isn't coming down. It'll make you shake your head and probably frown. Said over in Wisconsin, they're coming down. Over in Wisconsin, they're coming down.
All righty, folks. I hope you guys liked it. Hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed it.